3 young women vanished from Charleston society between March and October of 1827, all daughters of the same respected reverend. Official records claim they married and moved away, but no marriage certificates were ever filed, no witnesses came forward, and the Charleston County Courthouse burned mysteriously that December, destroying what few documents might have existed. Local historians discovered something else. In that same year, Reverend Josiah Pendleton somehow paid off gambling debts totaling over $12,000, an impossible sum for a country pastor whose annual salary was less than $300. The men he owed money to, 4 of the wealthiest and most powerful figures in the Low Country, never spoke publicly about how those debts were settled. What happened in that rural parish outside Charleston remains one of the darkest secrets ever buried in South Carolina soil. A conspiracy of silence that held for nearly 80 years until a dying woman's confession finally broke it open. Before we continue with the story of Reverend Josiah Pendleton and the fate of his 3 daughters, I want to ask you something. Have you heard whispers of this story before? Stories like this, buried deep in American history, deserve to be told. If you are listening from South Carolina, or anywhere in the South, leave a comment telling me what state or city you are from. And if you want more true historical mysteries that will make your blood run cold, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you will not want to miss what comes next in this tale. The truth about what happened to Catherine, Mary, and Abigail Pendleton is far worse than anyone imagined, and it begins not with the Reverend himself, but with the men who held his debts like chains around his neck. St. James Parish sat 12 miles northwest of Charleston, a stretch of Carolina low country where cotton fields met pine forest, and the Santee River wound through the landscape like a dark ribbon. In 1825, it was home to perhaps 300 souls, most of them enslaved workers on the scattered plantations that dotted the region. The white population consisted of plantation owners, a handful of merchants, a physician, and the families who depended on the land for survival. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did, and where reputation meant everything. The white chapel that served the parish stood on a slight rise overlooking the river, its boards painted fresh each spring, its bell tower visible for miles. Reverend Josiah Pendleton had ministered there for 11 years, arriving in 1814 with his young wife Sarah and their infant daughter Catherine. He was 28 then, educated at a small seminary in Virginia, ambitious but not wealthy, possessed of a commanding voice and a talent for scripture that made him popular with the plantation families who needed their Christianity served with certainty and comfort. By 1825, the Pendletons had 3 daughters. Catherine was 20 years old, tall and serious, with her father's dark eyes and a way of looking at people that made them uncomfortable, as if she could see through polite lies. Mary, 19, was softer, with her mother's blonde hair, and a voice that could sing hymns so sweetly that even the hardest overseers claimed to feel something stir in their chests. Abigail, the youngest at 18, was the cleverest of the 3, educated beyond what was common for women of that time and place. Josiah had taught her to read Latin and keep accounts, skills he thought might help her marry well, perhaps to a lawyer or merchant's son. The Pendleton home was a 2-story structure adjacent to the chapel, modest but respectable, with a parlor for receiving guests, a dining room where the family took meals, and upstairs bedrooms that stayed cool even in the suffocating Carolina summers. Sarah Pendleton kept a vegetable garden, and the family employed 2 enslaved workers, a man named Jacob who maintained the chapel grounds, and a woman named Dinah who cooked and cleaned. It was, by all appearances, a good Christian household, stable and unremarkable. What the congregation did not know was that Reverend Pendleton had developed a taste for cards. It started innocently enough, or so he told himself. After services on Sunday, some of the men would gather at the home of Charles Drayton, who owned the largest plantation in the parish, nearly 200 acres planted in cotton and rice. They would drink whiskey and play 21, a French card game that had become popular in Charleston's gambling houses. The stakes were small at first, a few dollars, pocket money. Josiah told himself it was fellowship, a way to maintain relationships with the men whose tithes kept his church running. But Josiah Pendleton had the gambler's curse. He could not stop when he was losing, and he could not stop when he was winning. By the spring of 1826, he owed Charles Drayton $800. He owed Judge Thaddeus Calhoun, who presided over the county courthouse in Charleston, $400 more. He owed Dr. Silas Pritchard, the only physician between the parish and the city, $600 from a particularly disastrous night when he had been convinced his luck was about to turn. And he owed Edmund Rutledge, who owned the general store and the cotton gin and half the debt notes in the parish, over $2,000, $4,000. More than 13 years of his salary. An impossible sum. The men were patient at first. They knew Josiah had no way to pay, which was precisely why they kept extending him credit. A man in debt is a man you can control, and these 4 men understood control better than most. They were not simply wealthy landowners and professionals. They were members of something older, something that existed in the shadows of Charleston society. A network that historians would later call simply the Circle, though its real name, if it ever had one, has been lost to time. The Circle was not a formal organization with charters and bylaws. It was something more insidious, an understanding among certain men that they would protect each other's interests, share information about who was vulnerable, and exploit those vulnerabilities for mutual profit. If a farmer was behind on his mortgage, Edmund Rutledge would know. If a merchant was facing a lawsuit, Judge Calhoun would know. If a woman was sick and desperate, Dr. Pritchard would know. And Charles Drayton, with his network of overseers and traders, knew everything that happened on the roads and rivers between Charleston and the backcountry. They did not simply loan money, they created dependence and then they harvested it. In January of 1827, the 4 men called in Josiah's debts. They did it privately, in the back room of Rutledge's store, with the door closed and a bottle of brandy on the table. Josiah arrived believing they were going to offer him more time, perhaps suggest some arrangement where he could pay in small increments over the years. Instead, Charles Drayton laid a piece of paper on the table. It was a detailed accounting of every card game, every loan, every dollar Josiah owed. The total had grown with interest to nearly $6,000. "You cannot pay this," Drayton said. It was not a question. Josiah's hands trembled as he held the paper. "I will find a way. I can borrow from my brother in Virginia. I can—" "Your brother is a school teacher," Judge Calhoun interrupted. "He does not have $600, let alone $6,000. "I can sell the house," Josiah said desperately. "The house belongs to the church," Dr. Pritchard said quietly. "You do not own it, Josiah. You own nothing except your reputation, and that reputation is about to be destroyed unless you listen to what we have to say." Edmund Rutledge leaned forward. He was a heavy man with thick fingers and small eyes, a merchant who had built his fortune by knowing the exact moment when a man's desperation exceeded his dignity. "We are not unreasonable," he said. "We do not want to ruin you, Josiah. We want to help you." "Help me?" Josiah's voice cracked. "You have 3 daughters," Drayton said. "Unmarried daughters. Lovely girls, all of them." The room became very quiet. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, and the sound of a wagon passing on the road seemed impossibly loud. "What are you suggesting?" Josiah whispered. Judge Calhoun removed his spectacles and polished them with a handkerchief. "We are suggesting marriages, Josiah. Beneficial arrangements for everyone involved. Your daughters are of age, respectable, well-raised. Any of us would be honored to welcome them into our homes." "You are already married," Josiah said. "All of you. You have wives." "We are speaking of private arrangements," Drayton said smoothly. "Discreet unions that would not require public ceremony. Your daughters would be well cared for, provided for, and your debts would be forgiven, completely." Josiah stood so suddenly that his chair fell backward. "You are asking me to sell my daughters like slaves, like property?" "We are offering them security," Rutledge said, and we are offering you survival. Refuse, and we will take you to court. Judge Calhoun will have no choice but to rule in our favor, as the law demands. You will be exposed as a fraud and a debtor. You will lose your position, your home, everything. Your wife will be destitute, and your daughters will have no prospects at all. What kind of marriages do you think they will make when everyone knows their father is a penniless gambler? The words hung in the air like smoke. Josiah looked from one face to another, searching for sympathy, for humanity, for any sign that this was some cruel joke. He found nothing but patient waiting. "How do I know you will forgive the debts?" he asked finally. "You have our word as gentlemen," Judge Calhoun said. "And if I agree, what exactly are you asking of my daughters?" Dr. Pritchard spoke for the first time in several minutes. "We are asking for their virtue, Josiah, their innocence. Once given, the debts will be satisfied proportionally. Your eldest daughter is worth $2,000, the second $2,000, the youngest $2,000, $6,000 total, a clean slate." Josiah's stomach turned. "You want me to deliver them to you like a father arranging advantageous matches for his daughters?" Drayton finished. "Which is exactly what you will tell them. You will explain that you have arranged marriages, that these are good men who will provide for them. What happens afterward is between them and their new husbands. And if they refuse, then you are a father who cannot control his household," Rutledge said. "And the offer expires. We are giving you 2 weeks, Josiah, 2 weeks to make your arrangements. We will begin with Catherine. She is the eldest, after all. It is only proper." The men stood, gathering their coats and hats. At the door, Judge Calhoun paused and looked back at Josiah, who remained frozen by the table, his face white as chalk. "This is a kindness, Reverend," Calhoun said. "In Charleston, there are men who would not be nearly so generous. You should consider yourself fortunate that we are men of faith and discretion." They left him there in the dark back room, with the accounting paper still in his trembling hands and the taste of bile in his throat. Josiah did not go home that night. He walked instead along the river road, his boots crunching on the frozen mud, his breath making clouds in the January air. The moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to cast shadows through the bare trees. He walked for hours until his feet ached and his hands were numb, trying to find some way out of the trap that had closed around him. He could run, pack the family in the wagon and head west, toward Tennessee or Kentucky, places where a man could disappear. But he had no money for the journey, and winter travel was treacherous. They would be caught before they reached the mountains, and then the situation would be infinitely worse. He could confess everything to Sarah and the girls, throw himself on their mercy, ask them to help him find another way. But what other way was there? He had already borrowed from everyone he knew. His brother in Virginia had his own family to feed. The church would cast him out the moment the debts became public. He could go to the authorities, report what the 4 men had demanded. But Judge Calhoun was the authorities in Charleston County. Who would he report to? And what proof did he have except his own word against 4 respected men who would simply deny everything and produce documentation of legitimate debts? As dawn broke over the river, pale and cold, Josiah found himself kneeling in the mud at the water's edge, praying for guidance that did not come. The God he had preached about for 11 years remained silent. The scripture that had always offered him comfort now seemed like empty words. He returned home as the sun rose and found Sarah in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. She looked up at him, startled by his appearance, the mud on his clothes, the hollow look in his eyes. "Josiah, where have you been? I have been worried sick. I need to speak with you," he said. Privately, they went into his study, a small room off the parlor where he prepared his sermons. Sarah closed the door and waited, her hands folded in front of her apron. Josiah paced to the window, unable to look at her. "I have made arrangements for the girls," he said. "Marriages, advantageous matches with respected men of the parish. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. What are you talking about? The girls have had no courtships. We have discussed no engagements. These are unusual circumstances, Josiah said. The men approached me directly. They are willing to provide generously for our daughters' futures. Which men? Charles Drayton has expressed interest in Catherine, Edmund Rutledge in Mary, Dr. Pritchard in Abigail. But those men are all married, Sarah said slowly. They have wives and children. These are special arrangements, Josiah said, and his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. The girls will be well cared for. They will want for nothing. Sarah moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. What have you done, Josiah? I have secured our future, he said. That is all you need to know. Tell me the truth. What have you done? He could not hold her gaze. He looked down at his hands, at the mud still dried in the creases of his palms. I have debts, he whispered. Gambling debts. More than we can ever pay. The men have agreed to forgive those debts in exchange for the girls. The sound Sarah made was not quite a scream and not quite a sob. She staggered backward, gripping the edge of the desk for support. You are selling our daughters. You are selling them like animals. I am saving this family from ruin, Josiah said, and he almost believed it. If I do not do this, we lose everything. Everything, Sarah, the church, the house, our position. The girls will have no future at all. So you give them this future instead. Sarah's voice rose. As mistresses to married men, as whores. Do not use that word, Josiah shouted. I am arranging marriages, legal binding arrangements. There will be no marriages, Sarah said. No ceremonies, no witnesses, no legal documents. You know that. You know exactly what you are condemning them to. Josiah turned away from her. It is done. I have given my word. Catherine will go first. In 2 weeks. You will help me prepare her. I will do no such thing. He faced her again, and something in his expression had changed, hardened. You will do exactly as I say, Sarah. You are my wife. You will obey me in this, or you will find yourself on the street alongside the girls when the creditors take everything we own. Is that what you want? To watch our daughters starve? Sarah stared at him as if she had never seen him before, as if the man she had married had been replaced by something wearing his face. I do not know you, she whispered. You know me, Josiah said. You know I am a man trying to protect his family the only way I can. Now help me, Sarah. Help me explain this to the girls in a way they will accept. But Sarah could not help him, because there was no way to explain it, no words that could make it acceptable. Over the next 2 weeks, Josiah worked alone, speaking to each daughter separately, weaving a story about advantageous matches and generous men who wanted to help the family. Catherine, the eldest, was the hardest to convince. She sat across from her father in his study, her dark eyes steady, her hands folded in her lap. You are lying to me, she said simply. I am telling you the truth, Josiah insisted. Charles Drayton is a wealthy man, a respected member of the community. He can provide for you in ways I never could. Charles Drayton is 50 years old and married, Catherine said. He has a wife who attends church every Sunday. What kind of arrangement is this, father? A private one, Josiah said. You will live in his household. You will be cared for. That is all you need to know. What does he expect in return? Josiah could not meet her eyes. What any husband expects from a wife. Catherine stood. I will not do this. You will do this, Josiah said, and his voice was desperate now. Or you will destroy this family. I have debts, Catherine, terrible debts that I cannot pay. This is the only way to save us. Save you, you mean? Catherine said. Save yourself from the consequences of your own weakness. I am your father. You will obey me. And if I refuse, will you drag me to his house by force? The silence that followed was answer enough. Catherine saw the truth in her father's face, the realization that he would do exactly that if necessary, that his desperation had made him capable of anything. You are damning me, she said quietly. "I am saving you," Josiah replied, but he could not make the words sound true. On the night of February 14th, 1827, Josiah drove Catherine to Charles Drayton's plantation house in the family wagon. It was a cold night, with frost forming on the bare branches overhead and their breath visible in the lantern light. Catherine sat beside her father in silence, wrapped in her heaviest cloak, her face pale and expressionless. Drayton was waiting on the front porch, dressed in a fine suit, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He helped Catherine down from the wagon with exaggerated courtesy, his hand lingering on her arm. "Welcome, my dear," he said. "I trust your father has explained the nature of our arrangement." Catherine said nothing. Josiah handed Drayton a small bag containing Catherine's few belongings, her clothes and books, and the Bible Sarah had given her as a child. "The debt?" Josiah asked. Drayton reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. $2,000, marked paid in full. Signed and witnessed, "You are a third of the way to freedom, Reverend." Josiah took the paper with shaking hands. He tried to meet Catherine's eyes, to offer some word of comfort or apology, but she had already turned away, following Drayton into the house. The door closed behind them, and Josiah stood alone in the cold darkness, listening to the sounds of the plantation settling for the night, the distant calls of night birds, the wind moving through the trees. He climbed back into the wagon and drove home, the paid debt note folded in his pocket, feeling like he had sold a piece of his soul. What Josiah did not know, what none of them knew, was that Catherine would never be seen again after that night. Within a week, rumors would begin to spread through the parish, whispers that something terrible had happened at the Drayton plantation, something that even the circle's power could not completely suppress. But that discovery was still to come. For now, Josiah returned home to face his wife's cold silence and to begin preparing Mary, his second daughter, for her own delivery to Edmund Rutledge. The nightmare was only beginning. The first indication that something was wrong came not from Charles Drayton, but from his wife. 3 days after Catherine had been delivered to the plantation, Margaret Drayton appeared at the Pendleton home, arriving in her carriage without announcement or warning. Sarah answered the door and found the older woman standing on the porch, her face drawn and pale, her hands clutching a shawl around her shoulders, despite the heavy coat she wore. "I need to speak with your husband," Margaret said. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had been crying or screaming or both. Josiah came to the door, surprised to see her. Margaret Drayton rarely left her plantation, and never without her husband's knowledge. She was a thin woman in her late 40s, with graying hair and the kind of defeated posture that comes from years of swallowing words you dare not speak. "Mrs. Drayton," Josiah said carefully, "what brings you here?" "Where is Catherine?" Margaret asked. "Where is that girl?" Josiah felt his stomach tighten. "Catherine is with your husband as we arranged. Is there some problem?" Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Some problem? You delivered your daughter to my home 3 nights ago and she has vanished. Gone. Disappeared. And my husband refuses to explain what happened to her." Sarah stepped forward. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "I mean she is not in the house," Margaret said, her voice rising. "I searched every room, every corner. I asked the servants, the field hands, everyone. No one has seen her since that first night. Charles tells me she ran away, that she left in the middle of the night, but Catherine had nowhere to run. Her belongings are still in the room he gave her. Her cloak is still hanging by the door." What girl runs away in February without even her cloak? Josiah felt the world tilting beneath him. Perhaps she did leave. Perhaps she was unhappy with the arrangement and— "Do not lie to me," Margaret said, and there was steel in her voice now. "I know what arrangement you made with my husband, Reverend. I know about the circle and their debts and their disgusting trades. I have lived with Charles for 26 years, and I know what kind of man he is. I know what he does to the slave girls on the plantation when he thinks I am not looking. And I know that something happened to Catherine Pendleton in my house, something terrible, and you are responsible." "How dare you come here and—" Josiah began, but Sarah cut him off. "Tell us what you know," Sarah said to Margaret. "Please, she is our daughter." Margaret's anger seemed to collapse into something closer to despair. She lowered her voice, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. The servants say they heard screaming that first night, from the east wing, where Charles took her. Screaming that went on for hours and then suddenly stopped. In the morning, there was blood on the floor of the hallway, a trail of it leading toward the back stairs. Charles had them clean it immediately, but the housemaid saw it. She told me. Blood? Sarah's face had gone white. How much blood? Enough that someone was badly hurt, Margaret said, maybe dying. And when I confronted Charles, he threatened to send me away, to have me committed to the asylum in Charleston for hysteria. He said if I spoke of this to anyone, he would ruin what little reputation I have left. But I cannot stay silent. I cannot live in that house knowing what I know. Josiah tried to find words, but his throat had closed. Images flashed through his mind. Catherine's face in the wagon, pale and resigned, Drayton's hand on her arm, the door closing behind them. We must go to the authorities, Sarah said. We must report this. The authorities are part of the circle, Margaret said bitterly. Judge Calhoun, the sheriff, half the men who hold power in this county, they protect each other. They always have. If you go to them, they will close ranks, and you will find yourself accused of slander or worse. Then what do we do? Sarah demanded. Margaret reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I am leaving Charleston. I have family in Savannah, a sister who will take me in. But before I go, I wanted you to have this. I found it in Catherine's room, hidden under the mattress. She must have written it that first night before whatever happened. She handed the paper to Sarah, who unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a letter, written in Catherine's neat script, the ink smudged in places, as if tears had fallen on the page. Mother, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I do not know what will happen to me in this house, but I know it will be nothing good. Father has sold me to pay his debts, and I am worth $2,000 to Charles Drayton. I do not think he will let me leave once he has taken what he paid for. I am not afraid of death, Mother, but I am afraid of what comes before it. I am afraid of being hurt, of being used, of losing myself entirely. I am writing this so you will know that I did not go willingly, that I did not betray you or our family by choice. Father is a coward and a fool, but I pray you will forgive him. He is weak, and weak men do terrible things when they are afraid. But you are strong, Mother. You have always been strong. Please take care of Mary and Abigail. Do not let Father do to them what he has done to me. I love you. I will always love you. Please remember me. Your Catherine. Sarah read the letter twice, then looked up at Margaret with tears streaming down her face. She knew, Sarah whispered. She knew he was going to kill her. We do not know that she is dead, Josiah said, but his voice was hollow. She could have run away. She could be hiding somewhere. Listen to yourself, Sarah said, turning on him with sudden fury. Listen to the lies you are telling. You know what happened. You know what Charles Drayton did to our daughter, and you sent her there anyway. You killed her, Josiah. You killed her as surely as if you had put a knife in her yourself. I did not know, Josiah said. I swear to you I did not know he would. You knew he was a monster, Margaret said quietly. Everyone knows. The servants, the neighboring plantations, everyone. They know what happens to the girls who disappear into his house. There have been others over the years. Slave girls mostly, so no one cares, but Catherine was white, respectable, a reverend's daughter. He went too far this time. Then we must expose him, Sarah said. We must tell everyone what he has done, and destroy yourselves in the process. Margaret shook her head. The moment you speak publicly, the circle will crush you. They will paint Catherine as a runaway, a troubled girl who left of her own accord. They will paint you as a hysterical woman and Josiah as a desperate liar trying to avoid his debts. You will have no evidence, no witnesses who dare to speak, nothing but a letter that proves only that Catherine was unhappy. It will not be enough. Then what can we do? Sarah asked desperately. Margaret pulled her shawl tighter. You can protect your other daughters. That is all you can do now. Do not send Mary to Rutledge. Do not send Abigail to Pritchard. Find some other way to pay the debts, or run, or face ruin honestly. But do not sacrifice another daughter to these men. They are devils, every one of them, and they will take everything from you if you let them." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I am sorry for what happened to Catherine. I wish I could have stopped it. But I am only a woman in a man's world, and I have no power here. All I can do is warn you, and pray you have the courage to listen." She left then, her carriage disappearing down the road toward Charleston. Sarah and Josiah stood in the doorway, the letter clutched in Sarah's hands, the weight of what they had learned pressing down on them like a physical force. "We have to find her," Sarah said. "We have to search the plantation, the woods, the river. We have to do nothing," Josiah said, and his voice was dead. "If we go searching for Catherine, if we accuse Drayton, the circle will destroy us. They will take Mary and Abigail anyway, as punishment. They will make sure we lose everything. Margaret is right. We have no power here." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You are going to do nothing? Your daughter is missing, probably dead, and you are going to pretend it never happened?" "I am going to protect the daughters I have left," Josiah said. "That is all I can do." "You are protecting yourself," Sarah said. "You are afraid of losing your position, your reputation. You care more about that than you care about Catherine." Josiah had no answer for that, because it was partly true. He was afraid, terrified in fact. Afraid of the circle's power, afraid of exposure, afraid of the ruin that awaited him if he stepped out of line. So he did what weak men do when faced with terrible truths. He chose to believe the lie that was easier to live with. He told the congregation that Catherine had married Charles Drayton in a private ceremony and moved to his plantation. He smiled when people congratulated him on such an advantageous match. He deflected questions about why there had been no public wedding, why Catherine was never seen in church or in town. He became an accomplice to his daughter's disappearance through his silence. But Sarah could not live with the lie. Over the following weeks, she began to change. She stopped attending church services, claiming illness. She stopped speaking to Josiah except when absolutely necessary. She spent her days in Catherine's old room, reading and rereading the letter, staring out the window as if expecting to see her daughter walking up the road. The servants, Jacob and Dinah, noticed. Everyone noticed. Sarah Pendleton was coming apart, fracture by fracture, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. And still, Josiah had 2 more debts to pay, 2 more daughters to deliver. Edmund Rutledge and Dr. Pritchard were waiting, patient as spiders, for their turn. March brought rain to the low country, cold and relentless, turning the roads to mud and the fields to marsh. Josiah watched the calendar with growing dread, knowing that Rutledge would soon demand his payment, that Mary would be next. Mary knew it too. She had read Catherine's letter, found it one morning on the kitchen table where Sarah had left it, forgotten in her growing madness. Mary had read it 3 times very carefully, and then she had folded it and hidden it in her bodice, close to her heart. Unlike Catherine, Mary did not argue with her father. She did not plead or threaten or refuse. She simply began to prepare in her own way for what was coming. She started taking long walks alone, disappearing for hours into the pine forests that bordered the parish. She stopped eating at family meals, claiming no appetite, growing thinner by the day. And she began spending time with Dinah, the enslaved cook, asking questions about herbs and plants, and which ones were safe, and which ones were poison. Dinah was a woman in her 50s, born on a plantation 20 miles south, sold twice before ending up in the Pendleton household. She had survived by being useful and quiet, and by knowing things that other people did not know. She knew which roots would settle a stomach, and which ones would tear it apart. She knew which berries would bring sleep, and which ones would stop a heart. When Mary asked her about tansy and pennyroyal, about black cohosh and cotton root, Dinah knew exactly what the girl was planning. "Those herbs are for women who do not want to carry a child," Dinah said quietly. kneading bread dough in the kitchen while Mary sat at the table, for women who find themselves in trouble and need a way out. "I am not with child," Mary said. "Not yet, but you think you will be." Mary's hands were folded on the table, her fingers laced together so tightly the knuckles had turned white. "My father is going to send me to Edmund Rutledge. I know what will happen there. I am not strong like Catherine. I cannot fight, but I can make sure there are no consequences." Dinah stopped kneading and looked at the girl with something like pity. "Those herbs are dangerous, Miss Mary. Use too much, and you will not wake up. Use too little, and you will bleed for days, maybe weeks. Might die from that too." "I know," Mary said. "Will you help me anyway?" Dinah was quiet for a long time, weighing the risk. If she helped the girl and it went wrong, she would be blamed. Enslaved people had been hanged for less. But if she refused, and Mary tried to find the herbs on her own, the girl might kill herself by accident. At least if Dinah helped, she could teach Mary the right amounts, the proper way to prepare them. "I will help you," Dinah said finally, "but you have to promise me something. If it comes to it, if you have to use these herbs, you come to me first. Do not try it alone. These things need to be done careful, or you will end up dead." "I promise," Mary said. Over the next week, Dinah taught Mary everything she knew about the herbs women use to protect themselves from unwanted pregnancies, the doses and preparations and timing. She gathered tansy from the woods, dried pennyroyal from her own small garden behind the house, showed Mary how to brew them into a tea that would bring on bleeding. "You keep these hidden," Dinah said, wrapping the dried herbs in cloth. "Do not let your father see them. Do not let anyone know you have them. And remember, if you use them, you will be sick. Very sick. For days, maybe. You will need to hide that too." Mary took the packet and tucked it into her apron. "Thank you, Dinah." "Do not thank me yet," Dinah said. "Just stay alive, child. That is all any of us can do in this world. Just stay alive." On March 23rd, Edmund Rutledge came to collect what he was owed. He arrived in the afternoon, driving a fine carriage pulled by 2 black horses, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Josiah earned in a year. He was a large man, 52 years old, with thick jowls and hands like slabs of meat. He had buried 2 wives already, both dead in childbirth, and his current wife was his third, a pale woman of 30 who rarely left the house. Josiah met him on the porch. "Mr. Rutledge, you are early. I thought we agreed on next week." "Plans change, Reverend," Rutledge said, climbing down from the carriage. "I have business in Charleston tomorrow, and I want this matter settled before I go." "Where is the girl?" "Mary is inside. But perhaps we should discuss—" "There is nothing to discuss," Rutledge interrupted. "We have an agreement. $2,000 of your debt in exchange for your daughter. I have the paperwork right here." He pulled a folded document from his coat, signed and witnessed. "Your debt to me will be marked paid in full once I take possession." The word possession made Josiah's stomach turn, but he nodded. "Let me fetch her." He found Mary in her room, sitting on the bed, already dressed in her traveling clothes. She had packed a small bag, just as Catherine had, and her face was calm, almost serene. If she was afraid, she hid it well. "It is time," Josiah said. "I know," Mary said. She stood and picked up her bag. "Father, before we go, I need to ask you something." "What is it?" "Do you regret what you are doing? Do you feel any shame at all?" Josiah opened his mouth, then closed it. He wanted to say yes, wanted to tell her that it was tearing him apart, that he had nightmares about Catherine, that every day he woke up hating himself. But the words would not come. Instead, he said, "I am doing what I must to protect this family. You are protecting yourself," Mary said quietly, just like Catherine said in her letter. "You are a coward, Father, and someday you will have to answer for what you have done to us." She walked past him, down the stairs, out to the porch where Rutledge was waiting. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face hollow and grey, but she said nothing. What was there to say? They had already lost one daughter, now they were losing another. Rutledge helped Mary into the carriage with exaggerated gentleness. his thick fingers lingering on her arm. "You are a lovely girl," he said. "We will get along just fine, you and I." Mary did not respond. She sat in the carriage, staring straight ahead, her bag in her lap. Rutledge handed Josiah the document. $2,000 marked paid. "You are 2/3 of the way clear, Reverend. One more daughter, and you are a free man." He climbed into the carriage and snapped the reins. The horses started forward, and Mary was carried away down the muddy road, her blonde hair visible through the carriage window until the trees swallowed her from view. Josiah stood on the porch, the document in his hands, feeling the weight of his daughter's words. Coward. The word echoed in his mind like a bell tolling. Behind him, Sarah let out a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a scream, and then she turned and walked back into the house, leaving Josiah alone with his conscience and his debts. What happened to Mary in Edmund Rutledge's house would not become clear for several weeks, but when it did, the horror would be worse than anyone imagined. For now, though, Josiah had only one thought. One more debt to pay, one more daughter to deliver, and then, perhaps, this nightmare would finally be over. He could not have been more wrong. Edmund Rutledge's home was a 3-story brick structure on the edge of town, grand and imposing, with white columns and wide verandas that overlooked a garden gone wild with neglect. His wife, Constance, was a thin woman with nervous hands and a habit of flinching when men spoke too loudly. She had given Rutledge no living children, though she had been pregnant 4 times, and each failure had made her more invisible in her own house. Mary was given a room on the 2nd floor, at the far end of a long hallway that smelled of dust and old wood. It was a comfortable room, with a bed and a washstand and a window that looked out over the garden. Rutledge had his enslaved workers bring up Mary's bag, and then left her alone for several hours, long enough for her to understand that this was a cage with soft furnishings. That first night, Rutledge came to her room near midnight. Mary heard his footsteps in the hallway, heavy and deliberate, and she stood by the window, waiting. When he opened the door, he found her holding a letter opener she had taken from the writing desk, the point aimed at her own throat. "Come any closer," Mary said, "and I will do it, I swear to God I will." Rutledge stopped in the doorway. He was wearing a dressing gown, his hair disheveled, and he looked more annoyed than concerned. "Put that down, girl. You are being foolish." "I am being practical," Mary said. "You paid for my virginity, Mr. Rutledge, but you cannot collect it from a corpse, so we are going to negotiate terms." Rutledge studied her for a moment, then laughed. "Negotiate? You think you have any power here?" "I have the power to make your investment worthless," Mary said. $2,000 for a dead girl is a poor bargain. So here is what I propose. You leave me alone tonight, and tomorrow we will discuss this like reasonable people. I will not fight you, but I will not be treated like an animal either. I want your word that you will not hurt me the way Charles Drayton hurt my sister." Rutledge's expression darkened. "What do you know about that?" "I know that Catherine is dead," Mary said. "I know that Drayton killed her, and that the circle helped him hide it. I know that if I die here, you will hide that too, but I also know that my youngest sister is still at home, and if something happens to me, she will not come willingly. She will fight, and she will talk, and she will make trouble for all of you, so it is in your best interest to keep me alive and reasonably content." Rutledge was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words. Finally, he nodded. "You are clever. I will give you that. Very well. Put down the letter opener and we will talk." "Give me your word first," Mary said. "Swear on whatever you hold sacred that you will not force me tonight." "I swear," Rutledge said. "On my mother's grave, I will not touch you tonight." Mary lowered the letter opener slowly, watching him for any sign of movement. When he remained in the doorway, she placed it on the desk and took a step back. "Good," Rutledge said. "Now listen carefully. I did pay $2,000 for you, and I intend to collect what I am owed, but I am not an unreasonable man. You can make this pleasant, or you can make it miserable. The choice is yours. Cooperate, and you will be treated well. Defy me, and I will make you regret it. Do we understand each other?" "I understand that you are a monster," Mary said. "Just like Drayton. Just like all the men in your circle." "Perhaps," Rutledge said. "But we are monsters with power, and you are a girl with none. Tomorrow night I will return, and you will fulfill your obligation. If you try to harm yourself, I will have Dr. Pritchard tend to you, and believe me, he will make sure you survive to serve your purpose. There is no escape, Mary. The sooner you accept that, the better it will be for you." He left then, closing the door behind him. Mary heard the sound of a key turning in the lock, and she understood that she was truly a prisoner now. She sat on the bed, her hands shaking, and pulled the packet of herbs from the hidden pocket she had sewn into her petticoat. Dinah had told her to wait, to come for help when the time came, but Mary knew there would be no help coming. She was alone. The next morning, Constance Rutledge brought Mary breakfast on a tray. The older woman's hands trembled as she set it on the desk, her eyes not quite meeting Mary's. "Eat," Constance said quietly. "You will need your strength." "Do you know why I am here?" Mary asked. Constance flinched. "I know. And you do nothing to help me. What would you have me do?" Constance's voice was barely a whisper. "I am his wife. I have no power, no money of my own, no place to go. If I speak against him, he will cast me out, or worse. I have seen what he does to people who cross him. I cannot help you, girl. I can barely help myself." "You could tell someone," Mary said. "You could go to the sheriff, to the church, to anyone who would listen." "The sheriff is part of the circle," Constance said. "The church elders are part of the circle. They all protect each other. I have tried to speak before years ago, and it nearly destroyed me. I will not make that mistake again. All I can do is survive, and that is what I advise you to do. Survive." She left quickly, locking the door behind her. Mary looked at the breakfast, the bread and butter and tea, and her stomach turned. She poured the tea into the chamber pot and wrapped the bread in a napkin, saving it for later. She could not eat. Not when she knew what was coming. That night, Rutledge returned, and this time he did not wait for permission. He locked the door behind him and advanced on Mary with the confidence of a man who knew he could not be stopped. Mary tried to fight, scratching and kicking, but he was twice her size and infinitely stronger. What happened next took less than 10 minutes, but it destroyed something fundamental in Mary, something that could never be repaired. When it was over, Rutledge stood and adjusted his clothing, breathing heavily. "You will learn to accept this," he said. "They all do. Eventually." Mary lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something break inside her that was deeper than bone. After Rutledge left, she pulled herself up, found the packet of herbs, and brewed them into a tea using the kettle in her room. She drank it all, gagging on the bitter taste, and then she lay down to wait. The cramping started within an hour, sharp and vicious, doubling her over. She bit down on her pillow to keep from screaming, knowing that if Rutledge heard, he might call for Dr. Pritchard, and then all of this would be for nothing. The pain intensified through the night, waves of agony that made her vision swim. By dawn, she was bleeding heavily, soaking through the sheets, and she knew with cold certainty that she had used too much. Constance found her in the morning, pale and barely conscious, lying in a pool of blood. The older woman's face went white. She called for the enslaved workers to help, and together they moved Mary to a different room, stripped the bed, and tried to stop the bleeding with rags and pressure. "We need to call the doctor," one of the workers said. "No," Constance said firmly. "No doctors. Not Pritchard. We will tend to her ourselves." For 3 days, Mary hovered between life and death. The bleeding slowly stopped, but she developed a fever that made her delirious, muttering about Catherine and shadows and men with blood on their hands. Constance stayed with her, bathing her forehead with cool water, forcing broth down her throat and praying that the girl would survive. Rutledge was furious when he learned what Mary had done. "That little fool tried to kill herself," he raged to Constance. $2,000 and she is damaged goods now. What am I supposed to do with her?" "Let her heal," Constance said. "Then send her home. You got what you paid for. Let her go." "I got nothing," Rutledge spat. "A girl who nearly bled to death is useless to me, but I cannot send her back like this." It would raise too many questions. So Mary remained in Rutledge's house, locked in the spare room, slowly recovering her strength but never her spirit. She stopped speaking entirely, would not eat unless Constance forced her, and spent her days staring at the wall with empty eyes. Something had broken in her that herbs and time could not fix. Meanwhile, back at the Pendleton home, Sarah was descending into her own kind of madness. She had stopped sleeping in the bed she shared with Josiah, instead spending her nights in Catherine's old room, talking to the empty air as if her eldest daughter was still there. She would set out 2 plates at dinner, one for herself and one for Catherine, and carry on conversations with the ghost of her missing child. "Mother is not well," Abigail said to her father one evening in late April. She was the only daughter left now, the last piece of collateral Josiah had to trade. "She needs help. She needs a doctor. She needs time," Josiah said. "She is grieving." "She's losing her mind," Abigail said. "And you are letting it happen because it is easier than facing what you have done." Josiah looked at his youngest daughter, seeing her mother's strength in her eyes, her grandmother's steel in her jaw. Abigail was 18, clever and stubborn, and unlike her sisters, she had spent weeks planning for the moment when her father would try to sell her too. "Dr. Pritchard will want his payment soon," Josiah said quietly. "I have stalled as long as I can." "Then let him take the house," Abigail said. "Let him take everything." "I will not go to him, Father. I will die first." "You are being dramatic." "I am being honest," Abigail said. "Catherine is dead. Mary is destroyed. I am all you have left, and I will not let you do to me what you did to them. I have been speaking to people, Father, quietly, carefully, and I have learned things about your circle, about the men you owe, things that could destroy them all." Josiah felt ice in his veins. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about evidence," Abigail said. "Letters, documents, testimony from people who have been hurt by these men. I have been collecting it all, hiding it away, and if anything happens to me, it will all be sent to newspapers in Charleston and Savannah and Richmond. The Circle may have power here, but they cannot suppress every newspaper in the South. You are bluffing. Try me," Abigail said. "Send me to Pritchard and see what happens. See how long it takes before every secret the Circle has buried comes screaming into the light. Is $2,000 worth that risk, Father? Is your freedom worth exposing Judge Calhoun's bribes, Dr. Pritchard's medical experiments on enslaved people, Drayton's murdered girls, Rutledge's extortion schemes? Because that is what will happen if you force my hand." Josiah stared at his daughter, seeing a stranger, someone who had transformed her fear and grief into something sharp and dangerous. He realized with cold certainty that she was not bluffing, that she had indeed been collecting evidence, building a weapon that could destroy not just him, but the entire Circle. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to find another way to pay your debts," Abigail said. "Sell the house if you must. Sell your books, your furniture, everything. Leave the church and find work as a laborer. I do not care how you do it, but you will not trade me like livestock. And you will help me get Mary back. Whatever condition she is in, wherever Rutledge is keeping her, you will bring her home. The Circle will never allow it." "Then the Circle will face the consequences," Abigail said. "The choice is yours, Father. What will it be?" For the first time in months, Josiah felt something other than fear. He felt the faint stirring of something that might have been courage or might have been desperation. But either way, it was enough to make him nod. "I will try," he said. "God help me, I will try." But even as he made the promise, he knew that the Circle would not let go so easily. Men like Drayton and Rutledge and Pritchard did not forgive debts or forget betrayals. If Josiah tried to escape their trap, they would tighten the noose. And if Abigail tried to expose them, they would destroy her just as they had destroyed Catherine. The war was just beginning, and the casualties were already mounting. What Josiah did not know, what none of them knew, was that Abigail had not been working alone. Over the past months, as her father had been selling her sisters piece by piece, Abigail had been building alliances with the most unlikely people in the parish. The enslaved workers who saw everything, the servants who heard everything, the women who had been silenced and ignored for years. She had started with Dinah, who had helped Mary and who knew the secrets of a dozen households. Through Dinah, she had reached out to other enslaved people on neighboring plantations, particularly those who worked in the homes of Circle members. She had learned about the young women who had disappeared over the years, the slave girls who had been bought and used and discarded, the suspicious deaths that were never investigated. She had also reached out to Margaret Drayton, who had fled to Savannah but who had agreed to provide written testimony about what had happened at her husband's plantation. Margaret was dying, consumption ravaging her lungs, and she had nothing left to lose. Her statement was detailed and damning, describing not just Catherine's disappearance but 3 other girls over the previous decade. All of them found dead in the woods or the river, all of them last seen at the Drayton plantation. And Abigail had found one more ally, perhaps the most dangerous of all. A journalist named Thomas Brennan, who worked for a newspaper in Charleston called The Southern Patriot. Brennan was young, ambitious, and hungry for a story that would make his reputation. When Abigail had approached him with her evidence, he had initially been skeptical. But as she laid out the pattern of abuse, the network of powerful men protecting each other, the trail of destroyed lives, he had realized she was offering him something explosive. "If I publish this," Brennan had told her, "they will come after me. They will sue me for libel. They will threaten my editor. They will try to destroy my career. Then you will need enough evidence that they cannot dismiss it," Abigail had said. "Testimony from multiple sources, documents in their own handwriting, a pattern so clear that even their friends will not be able to ignore it." "What do you want in return?" Brennan had asked. "I want them exposed," Abigail had said. "I want everyone to know what they did to my sisters. I want them to face consequences for once in their miserable lives. And I want to make sure they never do this to another family." Brennan had agreed, and together they had spent weeks gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, copying documents that Abigail had stolen from her father's study. By early May, they had enough to publish a series of articles that would shake Charleston society to its foundations. But Abigail had made one critical mistake. She had underestimated how closely the Circle was watching her. On May 8th, Dr. Silas Pritchard appeared at the Pendleton home, not to collect his debt but to deliver a message. He arrived in the afternoon, carrying his medical bag, his expression grave. "I have come to check on Mrs. Pendleton," he said to Josiah. "I understand she has been unwell." "Sarah is fine," Josiah said, though it was a lie. Sarah had not been fine for months. "Nevertheless, I should examine her," Pritchard insisted. "As the family physician, it is my duty." Reluctantly, Josiah allowed Pritchard upstairs to Sarah's room. What happened next would be disputed for years, with different accounts offering different versions. What is certain is that Pritchard spent 20 minutes alone with Sarah, and when he emerged, he was holding a vial of clear liquid. "Your wife is suffering from acute melancholia," Pritchard announced. "I have given her a sedative to help her rest. She should sleep for several hours. I will return tomorrow to check on her progress." He left before Josiah could ask questions. 2 hours later, Sarah began convulsing. Josiah called for Dinah, who rushed upstairs and found Sarah thrashing on the bed, foam at her lips, her eyes rolled back in her head. The convulsions lasted for nearly 15 minutes, and then suddenly stopped. Sarah lay still, her breathing shallow and irregular. "We need to get help," Josiah said desperately. "It is too late," Dinah said quietly. She had seen death enough times to recognize it. Whatever he gave her, it is killing her. There is nothing we can do now except pray. Sarah Pendleton died just after sunset, with Josiah kneeling beside her bed and Abigail standing in the doorway, her face white with shock and rage. The official cause of death, as recorded by Dr. Pritchard, was heart failure brought on by melancholia. No autopsy was performed, no questions were asked. But Abigail knew. She knew that her mother had been murdered, silenced permanently because the Circle had learned about her testimony to Thomas Brennan. Margaret Drayton had mentioned Sarah in her written statement, describing how Sarah had received Catherine's letter, how Sarah had known the truth about what happened. The Circle could not allow Sarah to testify, so they had eliminated the problem in the most efficient way possible. The funeral was held 3 days later, a small ceremony attended by perhaps 30 people. Judge Calhoun delivered the eulogy, speaking of Sarah's devotion to her family and her quiet grace, words that made Abigail want to scream. She stood beside her father's grave, watching them lower her mother into the ground, and she felt something inside her crystallize into pure, cold determination. That night, she met with Thomas Brennan in a tavern on the outskirts of Charleston, a place where they were unlikely to be recognized. She told him about her mother's death, about Pritchard's visit, about the suspicious timing of it all. "They are cleaning up loose ends," Brennan said grimly. "If they killed your mother, they will come for the others. Margaret Drayton, the servants who talked, anyone who can testify against them. We need to publish now, before they can eliminate all the witnesses." "What about my sister Mary?" Abigail asked. "She is still at Rutledge's house. If we publish, he might kill her to prevent her from talking." Brennan was quiet for a moment. "We could wait to mention her specifically. Focus on Catherine and the other missing girls first. Build public pressure until Rutledge has no choice but to release Mary or face an investigation." "No," Abigail said. "We publish everything, all of it. If Mary dies because of this, then at least her death will mean something. At least people will know what these men did." "You are talking about sacrificing your sister." "I am talking about ending this," Abigail said. "One way or another, it ends now." The first article appeared in the Southern Patriot on May 16, 1827. It was titled, "The Circle of Shame: How Charleston's Elite Trade in Human Suffering." The article laid out the basic structure of the conspiracy. 4 powerful men who used debt and blackmail to control their victims, who traded in young women like commodities, who had gotten away with it for years because they protected each other. The article did not name specific victims yet, but it provided enough detail that anyone familiar with Charleston society would recognize the men being described. It mentioned a prominent judge, a wealthy plantation owner, a doctor, and a merchant. It described their methods, their meetings, their shared interests in controlling the vulnerable. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Some readers were outraged, demanding investigations and arrests. Others claimed the article was libelous nonsense, gossip masquerading as journalism. The editor of the Southern Patriot received threats and bribes, people offering him money to retract the story or demanding that he reveal his sources. But Brennan and Abigail were just getting started. 3 days later, the second article appeared, this one titled, "The Missing Daughters of St. James Parish." It told Catherine's story in detail, describing her delivery to Charles Drayton, her disappearance, the blood found in his house, Margaret Drayton's testimony. It named names. Charleston exploded. Charleston. Drayton denied everything, claiming the article was defamation and threatening to sue the newspaper. Judge Calhoun issued a statement calling the accusations baseless and politically motivated. But the damage was done. People were talking, asking questions, demanding answers. The third article, published a week later, focused on Edmund Rutledge and Mary Pendleton. It described the arrangement Josiah had made, Mary's imprisonment in Rutledge's house, her desperate attempt to protect herself, her deteriorating condition. It included testimony from Constance Rutledge, who had secretly provided information to Brennan, risking everything to finally speak the truth about her husband. Rutledge's response was to barricade himself in his house with Mary still inside, refusing to let anyone in or out. A crowd began to gather outside, people demanding to see Mary, to confirm that she was alive. The sheriff, who was sympathetic to the circle, refused to intervene, claiming he had no legal grounds to enter Rutledge's property. But the crowd grew larger each day, and eventually it was not just men but women too, respectable Charleston matrons who had daughters of their own and who were horrified by what they were reading. On May 27th, the crowd forced their way past Rutledge's gates and demanded entry to the house. What they found shocked even those who had believed Brennan's articles. Mary was in the upstairs room, rail-thin and pale, barely able to speak. She had infections from the bleeding, fevers that had never been properly treated, and she was so weak she could barely stand. Constance had been caring for her as best she could, but without proper medical attention, Mary was dying. They carried her out of the house, past Edmund Rutledge, who stood in the hallway shouting threats and denials, and they brought her to a hospital in Charleston run by Presbyterian missionaries. Doctors examined her and confirmed what Brennan had written. She had been held against her will, abused, and nearly killed by herbs she had taken in desperation. The scandal was now undeniable. Even the men who had initially defended the circle were backing away, realizing that association with this story would destroy their own reputations. The South Carolina state legislature launched an investigation. The Charleston County prosecutor, under enormous public pressure, began preparing criminal charges. And then, on June 2nd, Charles Drayton solved one problem for the circle. He died. His body was found in his study, a pistol in his hand. An apparent suicide. The note he left claimed he was innocent of all charges, but could not bear the shame of the false accusations. 3 days later, Edmund Rutledge followed suit, hanging himself in his cell after being arrested on charges of kidnapping and assault. His suicide note was less apologetic, ranting about conspiracies and persecution and the destruction of respectable men by lies. Dr. Pritchard was arrested but never brought to trial. He was found dead in his cell within a week, poisoned, though whether by his own hand or someone else's was never determined. The official verdict was suicide. Only Judge Thaddeus Calhoun survived, and he did so by cooperating fully with investigators, providing detailed testimony about the circle's operations in exchange for immunity from prosecution. He claimed he had been a reluctant participant, forced into the conspiracy by threats and blackmail, though few people believed him. He resigned from the bench and left South Carolina entirely, moving to Texas, where he died in obscurity 10 years later. The trials and investigations continued through the summer and fall of 1827. More victims came forward, women who had been coerced or assaulted by circle members over the years. The full extent of the conspiracy became clear. It had been operating for at least 15 years, with dozens of victims, and it had been protected by a network of lawyers, sheriffs, and businessmen who looked the other way in exchange for favors and bribes. But for Abigail Pendleton, the victory was hollow. Her mother was dead. Her sister Catherine was still missing, presumably murdered and buried somewhere on Drayton's plantation, though her body was never found despite extensive searches. And Mary, though alive, was forever changed by what had been done to her. Mary recovered slowly in the Presbyterian hospital, her body healing but her mind remaining fractured. She spoke rarely, and when she did, it was in disconnected fragments, memories that surfaced without warning and then sank again. She could not bear to be touched, could not sleep without nightmares, could not imagine a future beyond the walls of her hospital room. Abigail visited her every day, sitting beside her bed, reading to her, trying to reach the sister she had lost. Sometimes Mary seemed to recognize her, would squeeze her hand or offer a wan smile. Other times she stared through Abigail as if she were a stranger. "I am sorry," Abigail whispered during one visit. "I am sorry I could not protect you. I'm sorry I could not stop this before it destroyed you." Mary turned her head slowly to look at Abigail. "You did stop it," she said, her voice barely audible. "You stopped them from doing it to anyone else. That matters, Abigail. It has to matter." "Does it?" Abigail asked. "Because it does not feel like enough. Not when you are here, not when Catherine is gone, not when Mother is dead." "Nothing would have been enough," Mary said. Not really, but you did what you could. You were braver than any of us. Abigail held her sister's hand and wept, and outside the hospital window, Charleston continued on, its society forever altered by the scandal, but still functioning, still finding ways to move forward and forget. Because that is what people do, even in the face of horror. They forget. But some things cannot be forgotten no matter how hard people try. Reverend Josiah Pendleton never recovered from the scandal. His congregation voted unanimously to remove him from his position, citing moral failure and betrayal of his sacred duties. The church seized the house where his family had lived, forcing him to find lodging in a boarding house in Charleston where no one knew his name or his shame. He tried to find work, but his reputation had spread too far. No church would hire him, no school would employ him, no business would take him on. He survived by doing manual labor, working on the docks, unloading cargo, a humiliating descent for a man who had once commanded respect and authority. He wrote letters to Abigail, begging for forgiveness, trying to explain his choices, but she never responded. She had moved into a small house in Charleston with Mary, using money from a fund that had been established by sympathetic citizens who wanted to help the Pendleton sisters rebuild their lives. She wanted nothing to do with her father, wanted no connection to the man who had destroyed their family. Josiah's final years were spent in increasing poverty and isolation. He developed a drinking problem, spending what little money he earned on whiskey that let him forget, at least temporarily, what he had done. He was found dead in his boarding house room in March of 1831, 4 years after the scandal broke. The official cause of death was liver failure, but those who knew him said he had really died of shame. No one attended his funeral except the minister who was paid to perform the service. He was buried in a pauper's grave on the outskirts of Charleston. His marker, a simple wooden cross that rotted away within a decade. By the time historians began researching the Circle scandal in the early 20th century, they could not even locate where Josiah Pendleton had been laid to rest. Mary Pendleton never fully recovered from her ordeal. She remained in the Presbyterian hospital for 2 years, but the damage to her body and mind was irreversible. She suffered chronic pain, recurring infections, and what doctors called melancholia, but what we would recognize today as severe trauma. In the winter of 1829, she contracted pneumonia. Her weakened body could not fight it, and she died on January 12th, just weeks before her 22nd birthday. Abigail was with her at the end, holding her hand as Mary's breathing grew shallow and finally stopped. Mary was buried beside their mother in St. James Parish Cemetery. The headstone read, "Mary Pendleton, beloved daughter and sister, may she find the peace denied her in life." Abigail never married. She devoted the rest of her life to helping women in desperate situations, working with missionaries to establish shelters, and advocating for legal reforms to protect the vulnerable. She became a respected voice for women's rights throughout the South, though the work took a visible toll on her health and spirit. In 1847, 20 years after Catherine's disappearance, an elderly woman named Rachel came to Abigail's door. Rachel had been enslaved in Charles Drayton's household and was freed after his death. She carried a secret she could no longer bear. "I know where your sister is buried," Rachel said quietly. "Mr. Drayton had us dig the grave that first night, in the woods behind the plantation, near the lightning-split oak tree. He said he would kill us if we ever told, but he is dead now, and I am old, and your sister deserves a proper resting place." Abigail hired workers to excavate the site Rachel described. They found Catherine's remains, along with a small gold locket their mother had given her. Catherine was reburied beside Mary and Sarah. Abigail commissioned an elaborate headstone that read, "Catherine Pendleton, 1807 to 1827, murdered for refusing to submit, first victim of the Circle. May her memory be a warning." The reburial brought the scandal back into public consciousness. Newspapers reprinted the old articles with new details. Other women came forward with stories of abuse by powerful men who had never faced consequences. Abigail gave interviews, speaking about the importance of accountability and protecting the vulnerable from exploitation. She also wrote a detailed memoir of everything that had happened to her family, entrusting it to her friend Thomas Brennan with instructions to publish it after her death. The book, titled The Price of Silence, became a sensation when it was released in 1858, reigniting debates about corruption and women's rights throughout the South. Abigail Pendleton died on November 3, 1857 at age 48, worn down by years of advocacy work and recurring illness, likely contracted from the many desperate women she had helped. She was buried beside her sisters and mother. Her funeral was attended by hundreds whose lives she had touched and whose voices she had amplified. Her gravestone was simple: Abigail Pendleton, 1809-1857. She fought for those who could not fight for themselves. The scandal of the Circle cast a long shadow over Charleston. The Drayton plantation was never successfully farmed again and eventually fell into ruin. Rutledge's grand house gained a reputation as an unlucky place and was torn down in the 1890s. The locations associated with the tragedy became cautionary landmarks, physical reminders of what happens when power goes unchecked. In 1927, on the 100th anniversary of Catherine's death, women's rights activists held a memorial service at the Pendleton graves. Similar commemorations have been held periodically ever since. The graves have become a symbol of resistance against abuse of power, visited by those who refuse to let the story be forgotten. Modern historians have identified at least 23 women who were exploited by Circle members over the conspiracy's 15-year existence. Most were enslaved or poor, their stories lost until patient researchers uncovered fragments in old records. The Charleston conspiracy was unusual only in that it was exposed. Similar networks likely operated elsewhere, their crimes buried forever. The White Chapel where Josiah Pendleton once preached still stands in St. James Parish. A plaque installed in 1830 lists the names of Catherine, Mary, Sarah, and Abigail Pendleton with the inscription, "May we never forget the cost of silence, may we always speak truth to power." This mystery shows us that evil flourishes in silence, and that speaking truth, even at terrible cost, can create change that echoes across generations. The Pendleton women paid with their lives, but their courage sparked reforms that protected countless others. Their suffering was not meaningless because it led to exposure, accountability, and a legacy that still inspires those fighting injustice today. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or could there have been other victims whose names we will never know? The story of powerful men protecting each other while destroying the vulnerable is not just history. It is a pattern that continues, making the Pendleton tragedy as relevant now as it was in 1827. Leave your comment below with your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark historical mysteries like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves true stories that make your blood run cold. The past has many more secrets waiting to be told. The 4 graves in St. James Parish Cemetery stand together beneath old oak trees draped with Spanish moss. Catherine, Mary, Sarah, and Abigail Pendleton rest side by side, their names carved in weathered stone, their story preserved by those who refuse to forget. They deserved better than the fates they received, but perhaps there is meaning in knowing their suffering led to change, that their courage inspired generations who followed. The Pendleton women remind us why we must remain vigilant, why we must speak up when we witness injustice, why we must never assume that power and respectability equal morality. Their legacy is not just about the past. It is about the ongoing struggle for justice, dignity, and the courage to speak truth no matter the cost. See you in the next video.